A couple of weeks ago, I participated in the Week of Weird, which was a reading event hosted by Crystal from Fiber Artsy and Jason from Jason's Weird Reads. Both of their channels will be linked below, so do check them out because they are both fabulous. And I was very excited about this readathon because I love an opportunity to focus on a specific style of horror. I really didn't feel like I was very familiar with the weird, so it was somewhat new for me. The readathon only lasted a week, and because I read at snail pace, I only read one short story and a couple of novellas, but I had such an incredible time. And today I will be sharing with you my thoughts about what I read. This is Michelle's Melancholia, where we read books to fear and shed a tear, and today we're getting weird. So when I first started thinking about my TBR for this readathon, I realized that although I intuitively know that I love weird horror, I couldn't really tell you what weird means. So if you know me, you know that every time I feel a little bit out of my depth, I like to do research. So I thought that I would incorporate a little bit of nonfiction into the readathon and try to read a little bit about the origin of the weird as a literary genre. So I borrowed a bunch of books from my library. To be honest, it was very silly of me to think that I could just read a genre study with zero background on actual literary analysis. So this one in particular just didn't really work for me. However, I also borrowed this huge anthology just called The Weird, a compendium of strange and dark stories, and this is edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer, and it has a very good introduction to what the weird is. So I'm just gonna quickly summarize the information I've gathered so far, and I think the biggest conclusion that I have come to is that the weird is really hard to define, but somehow when you see it, you recognize it. Which I guess it makes sense with the statement I made before about intuitively knowing I like the weird, even though I don't know exactly what that is. I'm sorry if all of this is making no sense, but at least it will be on theme. So originally Lovecraft defined the weird tale as a tale with supernatural elements, but that was not a traditional ghost or gothic story. But obviously this definition has now changed and expanded. And if I were to choose one characteristic that would indicate to me that a story is in the realm of the weird, would be that you can't rationalize it. And that's why some of them, even though they are terrifying, they also end up being strangely beautiful, and that's also why they tend to include a lot of fantastic elements. However, one thing I found super interesting is that even though you cannot make rational sense of a weird tale, the weird is still very compatible with science fiction. And actually this is one thing that I was able to extract from the genre study book. There is a part where it says, weird fiction isn't anti-science, it may indeed be very much pro-science, but it objects to the arbitrary limits that our ideas of the world, humanity, and ourselves impose on imagination. It focuses less on the rational process behind the science and more with the quest itself to generate more knowledge or improve our understanding of the world. And as Anne and Jeff Vandermeer very eloquently put it in their introduction, the weird embraces and is fascinated by the inexplicable. And, my favorite part, it reminds readers of the strangeness of the world and the limits of our understanding of it. So I guess what I'm expecting from these tales is supernatural, fantastical, or science fiction elements that I will find both horrifying and fascinating at the same time, and that will remind me that some things completely escape human understanding, and we have to live with that fact. So thank you for listening to this ramble, and I'm sorry if it didn't make any sense. And do let me know in the comments if you have come up with some definition of what the weird is, or if you just agree with the idea that it is purely based on vibes. Now, before I start reading and talking to you about it, I'm going to take a break because I have a burger to eat. See you later. She just turned on me and wanted to know whether I meant to stay in a haunted house and how long I expected to live if I did, for though she noticed I was sometimes a little hard of hearing, she did not believe that even I could sleep through those screams again. So the first prompt for the readathon is the old weird. So a weird tale written between 1910 and 1970. And in the anthology I mentioned, the stories are actually organized chronologically, so that was very helpful because I just chose to read the first one, which is The Screaming Skull by F. Marion Crawford. Actually, this is from 1908. And The Screaming Skull is pretty much exactly what the title suggests. And to give you an idea of how that screaming skull comes to be, let me just read to you a sentence that I really liked from the second paragraph of the story. If I were you, I would never tell ugly stories about ingenious ways of killing people, for you never can tell but that someone at the table may be tired of his or her nearest and dearest. And I really enjoyed this story, even though it was a bit unnecessarily long, but it was actually pretty creepy in kind of a whimsical way, given that we literally have a screaming skull in it. And although there's a very obvious supernatural component, the horror or scary elements were very subtle, and also there was quite a lot of ambiguity in the story, which I enjoy. I thought it was kind of similar to Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, in that the narrator is very interesting and they are telling you their account of events that happened, and it's up to the reader to decide if you think they are telling the whole story or if they are withholding certain information or maybe making subtle changes to the narrative. And I guess because this is very early weird, it was very similar to a traditional ghost story. So I might read a couple more stories for the old prompt, and then I'll be very excited to read something newer and see how that compares. So I'll talk to you soon. I looked about me carefully, noting everything. The turned over canoe, the yellow paddles, 2 of them I'm certain, the provision sack and the extra lantern hanging together from the tree, and crowding everywhere about me, enveloping all, the willows, those endless shaking willows. The next story I read was The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, and I had never read anything from him before. All I knew is that he wrote in a Lovecraftian style, even though I read somewhere that Lovecraft was a very big fan of Blackwood, whereas Blackwood didn't much care for Lovecraft's writing at all. So that's kind of funny. Anyways, Algernon Blackwood was one of the first writers that really ventured into the weird style, and I really want to talk about The Willows because it was so creepy. It is about a pair of friends that are boating or kayaking down the Danube River, and they stop at an island to spend the night because the weather is getting kind of bad, so they're concerned about continuing. And that is all. Literally nothing happens. They're just in the island, and the island is creepy. So I know that sounds boring as hell, but trust me, it was not. First of all, it is a very immersive experience because there are very detailed and multi-sensorial descriptions of the nature around them. So our narrator is just enjoying the landscape and thinking about how beautiful everything is, but very, very slowly, the way he starts describing things, it starts to become unsettling. And early on in the story, he says, "Midway in my delight of the wild beauty, there crept, unbidden and unexplained, a curious feeling of disquietude, almost of alarm." And this feeling grows and grows, and he starts fixating on the Willows that are living on this island. And also, as the weather gets worse and worse, they start to become hyper aware of how powerless humans are against the forces of nature, and that adds an extra layer of danger to the story. But essentially, it all hinges on the fact that these Willows are creepy as hell. And it was so subtle but so very unsettling that I promise I was reading and then I would look out the window and I would see the trees swaying in the wind and I would feel scared. And I can't really say I was afraid of anything in particular. It was just an ominous feeling, as if something bad was going to happen, but I couldn't tell you exactly what it was that was worrying me. Another aspect of the story that I really enjoyed is that even though our main character keeps getting this strange feeling that something is wrong, he always tries to rationalize what is happening, and even when actual strange things do occur, like for example some of their camping equipment gets damaged and some strange holes appear in the ground, he always tries to come up with an explanation that makes sense. And even at some point his friend encourages to stop thinking about the weirdness altogether, and he tells him, "We're wiser not to talk about it or even to think about it, because what one thinks finds expression in words, and what one says happens." The horror doesn't stay that subtle throughout, though. Towards the end of the story, the characters start experiencing things that seem to be an actual physical threat, so there is a bit more tension and action. However, once the story wraps up, there is still enough ambiguity left for the reader to decide if there was any truth to what they were experiencing or not.
Maybe if I hadn't bought the house, I wouldn't have found the videos and none of this would have happened. Judith would still be alive and I'd have lost nothing except some memories I could live without. But I'm not convinced. I think it would just have found another way of happening. Even before it all started, I felt like I was living backwards. The future seemed more real than the past.
The next and last book I read for Week of the Weird was this tiny novella, The Witnesses Are Gone by Joel Lane. And this was a book I came across during one of my many bookshop browses I do during the week. This caught my eye because it's a book I'd never seen before, I'd never even heard of it, but the blurb really intrigued me. And it says, "A masterwork of paranoid, destabilizing, weird fiction, and it will leave you unmoored for days." And this was blurbed by Paul Tremblay. And this was just the week before Week of Weird, so I thought it was a perfect opportunity to try something completely new to me. And I'm so happy I took the chance on this one. This is about a man who moves into a new house, and while he's going through a bunch of old VHS tapes, he finds a movie from a very obscure French film director. And he watches the movie and it's kind of disturbing. There's nothing explicitly disturbing, but it's just unsettling, I suppose. And this man gets obsessed with finding out more about this film and about this film director. And the whole thing is very confusing because it is not even clear if the director and these films exist at all. And this state of confusion and unsettledness, if that's a word, just permeates every aspect of this man's life, and it's invading his surroundings and even his psyche as well. This is a very bleak read. Before the VHS tapes even appear, the author introduces the character as someone who lives in Birmingham and is very fixated on this city as a center of industrial decay. It is also set in the post 9/11 era, And I guess a time when UK was entering the war, and this man just lives in constant fear of terrorist attack and in general other very intense social issues such as the management of toxic waste and things like that. So as I said, even before anything directly related to the plot happens, this man is already in a very bad mental state. It is a book that will leave you questioning the sanity of the main character, but also at some points your own sanity. It made me question what I'm searching for in life. What are my VHS tapes? What things in life am I fixating so much that I don't see the bigger picture? And it offers no real resolution, just an increasing sense of dread. And actually, I read the introduction of the book after I had finished it because I'm always very paranoid of spoilers. The introduction is written by M. John Harrison, which I don't really know, but he hit the nail on the head when he described how this book fits into the newer weird. And he says that this book offers the sense of a symbolic structure which doesn't quite let the reader in on its real themes, instead guiding you to where you can make a leap of your own. It's also a kind of demand, challenging the reader to dig into their interpretive reserves, to examine not the fiction so much as themselves. And I think if that was the intention of the author as well, he also nailed it. I would definitely recommend this to anyone who likes very quiet, reflective horror that doesn't mind plots that don't make sense, but that want to be pulled into a story that you can just sit and think about. But please do bear in mind that this is not going to put you in a good mood. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the vlog. In conclusion, I really enjoyed what I read, even though it wasn't a lot. I feel like I really got to explore different kinds of weird, and obviously Crystal and Jason really thought it through because the readathon prompts were geared towards different styles of story. So with the Screaming Skull, I completed the old weird prompt and also the dark prompt, as this had an unexplainable supernatural element. The Willows also fit the old weird prompt, and of course the Flora and Fauna prompt, as it revolves around nature. And finally, with The Witnesses Are Gone, I completed the new weird prompt. When I first picked the book up, I was hoping it would also fit the Out of This World prompt, which was for a story involving science fiction elements. And this was purely based on the fact that I knew VHS tapes were involved, but I didn't know what the story was about. I don't think it's science fiction, but it definitely was a completely different style of weird than the other two stories. And maybe for the next week of weird, I will try to focus on finding some stories that actually have strong science fiction elements in them. Crystal and Jason have also announced that there will be another week of weird this year, probably in September. I'm super excited for that. Maybe the weird will be my new favorite kind of horror, although I don't see it surpassing possession horror because that's my all-time fave, but it definitely came very close. As always, let me know in the comments what you thought about all of these books, if you've read them or if you participated in this event. What books did you read? What books did you love? Or just leave me any comment that you wish to. And I will see you in my next video, hopefully very soon. Goodbye!